So today's topic is about fraud and scam, and are you prepared to protect your business? The idea is really that one priority in small business owners is really to make sure that their business not only survive going into the future, but they also thrive, right? And that's pretty much the goal of business resilience and sustainability, right? Is really make sure that the business is prepared to weather whatever storm that comes their way going into the future. So today we'll talk about 5 topics. One, we'll take a quick look into our relationship with risk. We'll also look what is the state of fraud and scams today. We'll take a look on how our behavior is the weakest link when it comes to business risk. And, well, a few methods on how to protect our businesses today. The 5th topic is more of a timely topic. It's just a quick look on holiday season fraud and scam, because that's also Christmas for fraudsters and scammers, right? Is a busy time for everybody in both sides of this topic. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. So, our relationship with risk, right? Risk is something that we need to assess. And, well, how exactly do we assess it, right? And the question that comes to mind is really, what is the limit of our ability to assess risk, right? And here's something that you might know, but you might not have thought very hard and long about it. There is infinitely more things we do not know than there are things that we know, right? And you might think to yourself, oh boy, couldn't you have found a less soul-crushing information to start the webinar? Well, I understand it is a rough one, but there is value in really taking a closer look in all the things that we do not know. Imagine all human knowledge is a pie. So there you have it. You can pick your favorite flavor. I'll stick to apple pie, the classic. So if all human knowledge is a pie, our individual knowledge is a paper-thin slice of that pie, right? It's really, really like a see-through slice. So while that is indeed a crushing realization, there is great value in understanding our blind spots, right? When it comes to avoid risks and all sorts of business risks. And the lesson here is really, if you think about your day-to-day life, it is the car that you do not see coming that creates an accident, right? It is that element that it's not in front of you, you don't know about it, that really poses a risk. So when it comes to minimizing business risk, then the question is really, it's not about being prepared based on what you know, namely that thin slice of the pie. Minimizing business risk is really about considering all the things that you're not thinking about and eventually will hurt your business going forward, right? Here's a quote that I like that really summarizes this whole idea, is that risk is what's left over after you think you've thought of everything, right? So namely, risk is the rest of the pie, right? Everything that you did not consider. So, and since we're talking about risk and all the things we do not know about, there is, I think it's worth spending a minute and looking into how our blind spots can be a great asset, right? How the things we do not know can be a great asset, right? Well, basically, our blind spots can be a great asset if we're actually willing to explore them, right? And well, you might ask, but wait a minute, how can I think about things that I do not know about? right? And that's a totally valid question. And there are a few ways to do it. One way to do it is really to be curious, right? And investigate areas of your business by asking some questions and welcome the answers, regardless how harsh the answers that arise may be, right? If you think about the people area of your business, you can ask yourself, what are all the ways my employees can be scammed, right? So, and if you truly welcome answers, well, things will pop up in your head, right? Another area that you can investigate are your processes. How can my business processes be exploited? For example, my financial processes. How can somebody trick an employee to make a fraudulent payment? Are there, gaps in my processes that can be exploited? So if you ask that question, I'm sure you will come up with interesting answers and you will learn from those answers. You can also investigate the technology area of your business. Are there opportunities for someone to manipulate my business technology and go unnoticed? You may not have answers for that, but you can ask somebody that is your IT provider. They may be able to help you to investigate that and provide you answers. And that's pretty much the second way to investigate things that you do not know about. It's really getting outside help. For example, you can get help from an outside business advisor. That's what we do here at the Vermont Small Business Development Center. We advise businesses, we provide this external perspective that is always helpful to identify blind spots. And the reason for that is because others can see what we do not see, right? So basically, when it comes to minimizing business risk, really the message here is be curious, investigate your business areas. Where are the flaws that can be exploited? And are there people out there that can help me explore all these things that I don't know about my business that can be a risk going forward? So with that, let's take a look. What is the state of today's fraud and scams, right? What are the characteristics of 21st century fraud and scams? Well, here's a fact. Small businesses, they're a favorite target of fraudsters and scammers. And the reason for that is because small businesses, they don't have as many resources available to protect themselves, right? And that's why we, put webinars like this together and material together so that small business, they can get better prepared, because exactly they are the target. I mean, they are one of the favorite targets. And today, businesses rely on digital and online solutions for everything, right? That has made our lives so much more efficient, so much more convenient. Think about it. We don't need to go to a bank to pay a bill, to pay a vendor, to pay a supplier, or to make any kind of transaction. You can do that online. You can communicate with your customers online. You can market your services and products online. Most of the business work moved to the digital and online world, and that has made our lives a lot easier and a lot more convenient. But it also has made the life of fraudsters and scammers a lot easier and convenient as well. Therefore, fraud and scams today, they're everywhere in the digital and online world, right? And one important consideration are the communication tools that we use, right, to conduct business. Because communication tools are one of the most important entry doors that scammers use, right? And we know about it. For example, voicemail. We get all the time these robocalls with bogus messages asking us to perform some action or do something. We get bogus text messages, click in this link, or do something. Social media. Social media is a great tool for businesses because, well, it's basically free advertisement. It's a very easy and efficient way to communicate with your audience. But, well, that is also an entry door for fraudsters and scammers to access businesses. And good old email, right? I mean, there's nothing new. Spam. We have good spam filters these days, but a lot of bogus emails, they reach our inbox. So the main message here, the bottom line, is anyone that is responsible for external communication should be really aware of the risks of being lured into a scam, because they are communicating with the world, and that is exactly the entry door that scammers and fraudsters use. But that is really just half of the story, right? Because if we look at how fraudsters and scammers, how they operate, right? Well, basically, there's nothing new to it. Today's digital scammers, they're no different from those of the analog past. All they want is to, get illegal financial gains. They want your cash. That's all they want. It's no different from the goal of previous scammers. So the advantage today in the digital world is that they can easily access businesses from far away, either via the internet or communication means, as we saw before. But as I said, this is just half of the story. They need someone in the inside to inadvertently open the door for them, right? For the most part, scammers need collaboration from someone in the inside, but not a malicious collaboration, just really inadvertently do something for them. And they will use all sorts of tricks of the trade to get a business employee to actually do something for them, to open the door for them, so to say. So one thing that is really important to remember is that scammers are not hardworking. They will prefer a low-hanging fruit, right? And that means businesses, they are not that prepared to deter them, right? Businesses, they are the easiest targets. So there we go. We have them exploring communication tools. Then we have the need for somebody in the inside to participate for their goals to be met. So how are really how are the most used digital fraud and scam tactics that they use, right, to make this combination really work? Well, by far, the preferred tactic, it's really to pretend to be someone else to gain access. And once they gain the trust and access of that person in the inside, they can move on to exploit the business that they are targeting, right? And why they do that, and why they have been doing it for millennia and is still working? Well, because most of us are trusting individuals, right? And it's this very quality that they will exploit. So for the access part, they will send emails, messages to individuals in the business pretending to be somebody they know or they trust, right? That you might have heard of this term that is called phishing with PH. And these messages will usually urge the person to either click on a link, download a file, or take some sort of action. And that's how they try to gain access. Once they gain access, once the person that they are targeting participates, respond, take an action, click on a link, download a file, that's when they start to exploit them, the victim. They are in the inside. Well, if the person click on a link or download a file, the computer can be locked by a malicious software that is downloaded through that link or through that file that was downloaded. And this malicious software will keep the files hostage, and they will request for a payment to release those files. That is what is known as ransomware. You might have heard of it. And this is really the latest, most used type of tactic that is deployed against the small business community, right? Because it has become very easy for scammers to send out mass messages, and eventually somebody will click on a link, somebody will download a file, and then they're on the hook, right? All they need is volume, and that's what the digital world provides fraudsters and scammers. It's volume, access to a lot of business, because one will fall for it. And that's what I call the low-hanging fruit. So also they may lure employees into taking some actions, such as changing an online banking access that just they will access the bank and not the business, or sending out checks to them or making some other type of payment for them. Well, now that we talked about all these methods, and we talked about the fact that we need collaboration from someone in the inside, well, then it becomes clear that our behavior, the way we respond to these messages, the way we decide to respond or not to respond, really, is really the key factor to guarantee that this fraud will be successful or not, right? So in this way, our behavior is really the weakest link. So when we think about it, why are we the weakest link in this digital and online world? Well, let's look at the machine world and the human world. Machines are rule-based and humans are emotional, right? And that is great. That is what makes us unique, but that is what makes us vulnerable as well. If you look at a machine algorithm, that goes more or less like that. If safety features are enabled, then perform the task. Else, do not perform the task. Well, it's very process-oriented, very pragmatic, matter of fact. And the reason it is that way is because it's to prevent failure, to prevent errors, right? Now, if you look at human algorithm, well, it goes more or less like that. If asked nicely, then perform the task. Else, do not perform the task. And by the way, make their life impossible, because seriously, how rude, asking it not nicely. So that's who we are. We are emotional creatures. And that is not necessarily bad, right? It's not that machine is better than human or vice versa. They have its upsides and they have its downsides. But the message here is that this emotional aspect of people is exactly why scammers will try to access. For example, they will try to explore compassion. They will try to trigger a sense of urgency. That is exactly where they go. Now, one way to combine the best of both of these worlds, right, because they have both upsides, it's really to create internal protocols for your business. And what internal protocols do, they add rule-based benefits to human operations. How is that? Imagine you work making payments for a business. You're an employee of a business and you make payments, and then here comes that message that say, hey, I'm a supplier, I need you to make a payment of several thousands here to me. And you don't know what's going on, you don't know the supplier, you don't know anything. So, but it's a high dollar amount. If you have a rule that says 2 people must approve payments above this dollar amount, well, here's an additional chance to actually have that verified by somebody that may know if this is a legitimate request or not, right? This is just one way to add this machine rule-based type of measure into human operations to try to buffer a little better this type of fraud attempt. Now, talking about being triggered by scammers, they will always use a sense of urgency, very, very often, right? That kind of urgency. Here, this thing is burning. I need you to send the payment now, right? So why should urgent requests always be scrutinized? Well, and this is a quote that I like. What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important. So true. And often fraudulent requests will have this sense of urgency. It's done on purpose, so we act hastily. We don't question the authenticity of the sender or the authenticity of the request. We just take action immediately. So whenever you get an urgent request, raise a red flag. And everybody in the business should know how to use the slow protocol, right? We talked about adding protocols to the business, machine rule-based benefits to human operations. So the slow protocol is one of these methods that you can use that basically don't impulse respond, go slow. What it is, the slow protocol? First, slow down, stop, and do not act. Do exactly the opposite of what the request is asking you to do. The urgent request is asking you to do something right now. You do the opposite. Slow down, stop, do not act. Then you log the contact, you write down the information and who's asking what. You make one phone call to somebody that can verify if this is a legitimate request. And in case it's not, who's the authority to be informed, right? If it is a scam. In case of Vermont, you should reach out to the Vermont Attorney General's office. And at the very last slide of this presentation, I have information for their office and their scam reporting hotline. So talking about human behavior, there's another aspect, and that goes to business owners. How can business owners' management attitude help prevent fraud and scam, right? Because in the end of the day, preparedness is an attitude, is really not a skill. And when we talk about management attitude, we can talk about a reactive management attitude, which basically only acts on the problem when it's really burning very hot and there's no way to ignore it. Or we also have a proactive management attitude, which are those that organize themselves to maximize the chances that the problem never happens. So if I ask you, what do you prefer? To deal with the problems when it's too late, or to ensure that you avoid problems that are avoidable? Well, I guess the answer is pretty clear. It's best to be proactive. But if you think about it, that is really not how most of us operate, right? So I would invite you to ask yourself, if you're a business owner, am I a reactive or proactive manager? And welcome the answer, regardless what answer that may be, because that will help you also to think further. Is my managed attitude making things easier or harder for me? My recommendation is really to make a conscious choice towards proactive management. The benefits are really limitless. And if you decide not to choose anything, well, then remember, not choosing anything and letting chance manage your business is also a choice. And here's another quote that really sums this up very well, and we all have been there. It takes as much energy to wish as it does to plan, right? So now we looked into our relationship with risk. We look into how our behavior plays out into this world of fraud and scam. So how are the ways that we can really protect our business? How can we really do? So luckily, we don't need to use any of these methods that you see on your screen. We can have much more sophisticated methods to protect our business these days. And well, the most important thing to deter fraud and scam, as we saw before, don't be the low-hanging fruit, really. Discourage scammers from targeting your business. Add as many obstacles as you can. And what are these obstacles? Well, there you are. You should be up there. Your business should be that bright, nice apple all the way up in the tree, not the low one. So these methods, the most effective ones, are really to use strong passwords and two-factor authentication. So the idea is that, well, most fraud is in the online and digital world. And to access, let's say, important systems like online banking, you need passwords. The more you make it, the stronger you make the password, and the usage of two-factor authentication makes it almost impossible to anyone to break into your bank account, right? As for strong passwords, they're considered strong if they use 12 or more characters. They use symbols, they use upper and lower case letters, and they avoid common words. As for two-factor authentication, which is that additional code, once you put your username, password, then you get an additional code either by text message, either by email, or you have an app that gives you that number. If you don't use that, at the very least, use two-factor authentication for financial services. For example, your online banking, right? Protect the most critical systems, the most critical accounts you have. The other way to deter them is really to keep your software up to date and antivirus running all times. So the software, it's really because if your software is outdated, it is more prone, it can be easily hacked. So, but you don't need to do much. You just enable automatic software update on all your devices, smartphones, laptops, computers, tablets, you name it. And you say, okay, auto update in the night while I sleep. And that's that, you're good. As for antivirus, use antivirus in all devices. Ensure that they are always enabled and up to date. And here's a note for Apple users. Mac computers, Apple phones, iPhones should use antivirus as well. Back in the day, Apple products were safe from viruses. Today, that's no longer the case. So antivirus, regardless what kind of device you use. And third, another method to, most importantly, last but most importantly, the method to deter fraud and scam is really to train your employees, right? Because as we saw, we are the weakest link. We opened the door. So as we spoke before, you can create protocols either for high-value financial transactions, or if somebody's asking to change the access of your online account, online banking, or the slow method, right, that we saw before. That is one way you can train your employees. And because not everything is perfect, right, and it only takes one person to click on a link or download a file or do something, well, if something really happens, something bad happens, you should have a remediation plan. And a remediation plan is not like a 50-page document that you need to produce, nothing like that. It can be as simple as having a list of emergency contacts in case your business falls victim to fraud. It can be an IT person that you know you can contact anytime, or your lawyer, or the state authority, a list of people that you know, okay, those are the emergency contacts, and you have that list somewhere you can find it in an emergency, right? That is important. Otherwise, it's not very useful to have a list, an emergency list buried somewhere that you cannot find. So these are really the three most foundational ones. Are there other methods? Sure. You can always do more. One thing that you can do that is very helpful is to back up your files. That can be vital if they are kept hostage in case you're a victim of a ransomware. You can back them up in a physical file storage, or you can back them up in the cloud. So if your files are hostage from a fraudster, well, you have still access to them somewhere else. You can secure a router, right? Your router is that little device that provides internet for your business. The most important thing to do is to change the default password for a strong password that we talked about. And if your customers need access to Wi-Fi, create a separate network, right? A guest network. Don't give access to everybody to your main network that you use to conduct business. Last but not least, restrict access to certain softwares and systems only to those who need to use it. For example, your online banking. Only the people that needs to make payment or use financial information should have access to it, right? That is pretty obvious, but you can set different levels of access. Imagine that I work in the finance for you. I don't need to make any payment, but I need to check the numbers. I just need to see the numbers. So I don't need full access. I can have a restricted access or just a read-only access because I don't need to do anything. I just need to see the numbers. And that is not because you don't trust your employees. It's simply that if I get a bogus message that tells me, hey, can you make a payment such and such for me? Well, I have access to the bank account, but I cannot make the payment, right? So that just deters fraud to the extent that employees cannot inadvertently do things that will harm the business. So, and now we talked about a lot of things that you can and should do. And you might be thinking, well, this is a little overwhelming, isn't it? Right? You might think, this is too much. I must run a business and do all that. No, that's not going to happen. Well, and I fully understand that. But let me try to bring that, provide you a different perspective. It is only overwhelming if you see risk mitigation as an additional burden, right? And if we see something as an additional burden, we're probably not going to even do that. So I will invite you to look at it very differently. Think about it. We spend on average 1.5 hours a day preparing and consuming food. That is 548 hours each year, 23 full days, 1 full business month just dedicated to preparing and consuming food. That's a lot of time. But we don't mind it. We do not resent all this time that it consumes. Why? Well, we do not see it as a burden. Why is that? Well, because it is a necessary task for our survival. And with that in mind, I would argue that risk mitigation is also a necessary task for your business survival, right? Just as consuming food is a necessary task for us to survive. So if business preparedness becomes part of your business routine, it's no longer a burden. It's simply what you do. It's like preparing and consuming food. It's simply what you do. It's not a burden. So as for the overwhelming part, well, start small. Start where you can start. Baby steps. And slowly you can expand your preparedness and have all these measures in place, right, to protect your business. And by now you might be thinking, Sergio, that is all great, but I wish you could just give me a simple action plan so I can get started. Well, I'm not a genie in a bottle, but I will grant you this wish. That is exactly what we prepared here. We have a 1-pager action plan. It looks just like that. The link is on the slide and you get access to it at the end of this presentation. And that 1-pager contains the 3 most important steps to protect your business, which is basically a summary of what we talked about here today. The access protection, the technology protection, and the people and business protection. So, and now I would like to shift gears a little bit to a more timely subject, holiday season fraud and scam. So why is that? Well, because now, as I said in the beginning, yes, it's Christmas for fraudsters and scammers too. Businesses and employees, they're very busy and they may not spot suspicious activities because they're just way too busy. And I was looking really what are the top small business scams in this time of the year. And the list is just very, very, very sadly long. But a few that I find interesting and worth sharing here are alerts about compromised accounts. So you might get messages alerting that a bank or online shopping account or something was compromised. Those are rarely true. But you may say, hey, that looks, sounds, and feels just like my bank is sending me a warning, but it's not. And that is really a very, very interesting phenomenon these days, that fraudsters, they have gotten really, really good at replicating bank communication, right? It really looks, sounds, and feels just like your bank sent you a message that there is a problem with your account, but, well, that can be a fraud. So before clicking on any link coming from messages like that, just double check. Contact the account provider, contact the bank to verify, and don't contact through a phone that is in that message, a phone number that is in that message. Go and contact independently your bank to verify it, because, well, if it's not a fraud, excellent. You can go ahead and see what's the problem. But if it is a fraud, well, then you should report it. Another one that I found really mind-blowing that this is possible, those are chargeback frauds, right? That happens like that. Consumer makes a legitimate online purchase with a legitimate credit card and requests a chargeback after receiving the goods or service. Basically, they receive the products and they call the card and say, I don't recognize this charge. Then the credit card provider will analyze it, and once it is approved, a refund issue can be demanded from the merchant. So the merchant may be on the hook to refund that payment to the card provider. So it really depends. It gets very complicated. It really depends on what kind of agreement the merchant has with the card providers, what kind of service. So there's a lot of variation from that. But why that is important now in the holiday season? Well, because the volume of sales go up and the volume of returns and chargeback also go up. And if you don't follow those very carefully, very precisely, maybe one of them is a fraudulent chargeback. Somebody got the product and simply decided to cancel the purchase and get their money back, right? Having the product. One third one that I found interesting as well are the holiday deals for business services. For example, someone offering an irresistible holiday deal for a marketing and promoting service package. And well, it can be legitimate, but it can also be a scam. So how do you know? Well, you get as much information as possible. You write all down and you say, thank you, I will call you back. And you go ahead and research it. You do your due diligence. You really find out if this is legitimate. If it is, well, then great. Maybe you do have a good holiday deal for a marketing package. But if it's not, and you can tell for sure it is not legitimate, well, then report it. So in the end of the day, yes, the threat is real. You have tech support imposters, fake IRS refund claims, service disconnection threat, like utility services disconnection threats. You have to pay it, otherwise we'll cut your internet or your electricity, something like that. Business insurance scams, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So here's just a piece of data. The top 10 scams reported by businesses in Vermont. This is from 2020, but it gives you an idea that half of the scams are really fall into two categories: business imposters, email, and fake order of services and goods, right? And then you have all the other ones: utility disconnection, fake representation of government agency and organizations, and so on. So the last message is really, yes, it is out there. That's the world we live in, and we should make the best out of it and really, really be prepared and think about all those things we talked about. And with no further ado, if you have questions, I'll be pleased to answer, or at least try to answer them. Let me see. Anything in the chat?
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I can't see any other hands raised. Okay, well, before we conclude, just to let you know that this presentation was recorded, so we will have it posted soon and you can share that or